Oh my gosh, this story, I just can't even believe it. I can't even believe it. So this story actually came from one of y'all on here. You guys recommended this author, and I have a whole list of names of authors that I'm wanting to like do a deep dive into, but I saw this recommendation. I was like, you know what? Let me just go into this one. Let me just pick this one because I have them in no particular list. And wow. At first I thought, is there really like even a story here? There is. So welcome back to the Lavender Book Company. My name is Kat. I'm a children's book author and illustrator, but I am really inspired by the classics. And so the children's books that I make are really inspired by the classics that we know and love. And here on my YouTube channel, I kind of dive into everything children's books. So that includes doing these deep dives on different children's book authors. And I have a few so far going in this series. So if you want to see more of these stories because they're very interesting, then definitely go check out that playlist. You guys will absolutely love it. Before we jump into today's story, you guys know the drill. Make sure to subscribe, like, all that fun stuff. And like I said, this one came from a recommendation from you guys. So if you have a suggestion on someone that you would like me to dive into a little bit more, leave them down in the comments below. I am just kind of adding them to like a master list, and I would love all the recommendations. So today we're talking about Enid Blyton. So Enid Blyton was born in London, England, and so that is where our story is taking place today. So she was born on August 11th, 1897, and she was the oldest of three kids to Thomas Blyton and Teresa. And actually, when Enid was born, a few months later, like when she was very young, she actually almost died from the whooping cough, but thankfully she was nursed back to health and everything was fine. Now, it's said that she was very close to her dad. They spent a lot of time together. He imparted his love of nature and kind of his passions. He kind of really infused them into Enid. And so she really cherished this time with her dad. And unfortunately, she did have a really hard relationship with her mom, and it just like did not get along well. And so this is where Enid honestly developed a lot of her interests from her dad. So like in nature and literature, also in theater and kind of things like that. So kind of more of that kind of the creative outlets, which I can totally relate to. Like I said, Enid was very close to her dad. And so she was actually really devastated when her dad left the family around the age of 12 or 13. I saw stories from with either age, so I don't know if she was just close to turning 13 or whatnot, but around the age of 12 or 13, her dad decided to leave the family, and she was just absolutely devastated, rightfully so. And I did try to do some research on why he left, but I really couldn't find anything really concrete, so that's just kind of an open-end thing. So from 1907 to 1915, this is where Enid attended St. Christopher's School in Beckenham. I love all the names in London, but I feel like I just butcher all of them. Now, she really enjoyed the physical activities, but she had a harder time when it came to the academics, which, again, I can relate to on a level. Okay, that was like totally me. So she loved tennis. That was always a lifelong thing of hers, which there's way more to that later, but we'll get there. We'll get there. And she was also the lacrosse captain as well at her school. So she did really well when it came to like the physical stuff. But then of course just kind of struggled when it came to the academic stuff. But this is also where she really recognized that she really loved writing. She just excelled in writing specifically. And because it was just more creative, it was a way for her to kind of be more creative. And so she actually entered in a poetry contest for Arthur Mies. And they actually offered to print her verses to kind of help her going with her writing journey. They wanted to like really help facilitate that. But her mom just called her writing like a total waste of time. But thankfully, due to a school friend's aunt, she really helped her kind of just keep pushing her towards writing because she just saw the potential in Enid for this writing. And so she just kind of kept pushing her to do it and ultimately kind of kept her in the writing game. And Enid's dad, when he was around, he did actually teach her really well when it came into music, mainly in the piano. And there was kind of a period where Enid kind of debated on becoming a professional musician, but then she just kind of decided, no, like, I want to go into writing. Like, writing is my thing. That's where I want to go. That's what I want to do. So ultimately, that's what she kind of decided on, was she was going to pursue writing. Sorry to interrupt today's story time, but this video is sponsored by me. So for those of you who don't know, my company is called Lavender Book Company. So my first book, The Adventure of Theodore James and the Great Horned Owl, is available for purchase. I still do have some left in my first run that are all autographed, so make sure to go and grab that. These books are just very high quality. I am very, very big on quality. I'm really wanting to just create really beautiful, high quality stories and characters for your kids to enjoy. And I'm very, very inspired by the classics. So you'll see a lot of inspiration from the classics in my books. This one especially with Beatrix Potter. And not only do I have my children's book available right now, my second book is going to be releasing very, very soon. And I also do have some really pretty handmade chain bookmarks and ribbon bookmarks. I have some that went on clearance. I also have some Kindle charms. So make sure to go and grab them, check them out, and I'd absolutely appreciate any support. And let's go ahead and get back into the story. After she finished school in 1915, she actually moved out of the family house and then moved in with her friend Mary Attenborough, which is the friend of the friend that she had in school where the aunt was like, do your writing, do your writing. That was the friend. It was her aunt who kept her writing. So she moved out, moved in with her, and they would live together for a short period of time. And then she moved in with George and Emily Hunt in Seckford Hall, where it's actually said that she got a lot of her inspiration for her future stories because it said that it was kind of haunted and it had kind of secret passageways and things like that. So it was said that she kind of tucked this stuff away in the back of her mind to then use later in future stories. And then at Woodbridge Congregational Church, she met a lady named Ida Hunt, who kind of really encouraged her to actually look into teaching. She thought, I think you'd be really good into teaching because you seem to have kind of a knack with kids. And so this kind of sparked her intrigue into the world of teaching. So then she entered in like a national teacher's training course. And also kind of at the same time, she had kind of officially severed all ties with her family at this time. So there was really no contact at this point in her life with her family. So at this time, Blyton was also still writing and she was actually submitting a lot of stuff to publishers, but her stuff just got rejected left and right. She was getting just rejected, but ultimately she said that it really helped kind of fuel her fire because she said like in the struggle, it really helps you determine like your character and how hard you're willing to work for things and your determination overall. And she thought this was true like in any sense. So like through the rejection, you really kind of find like who you are, how much you're willing to work for it, how much you want it, because it's not always just going to be this like yellow brick road. So in 1916, her first poems were actually published in Nash magazine. So then around this time period, she almost kind of jumped around a little bit. So she did work at a school after she got her teaching certificate in 1918. And then a couple years later, she ended up getting a job as a nanny for a few boys for a family, and she stayed there for a couple years. So in 1922, her first book was finally published. It was a collection of poems called Child Whispers, and her friend from school, Phyllis, she ended up doing the illustrations for this book, and I believe she did some other books too for Enid as well. And let me just say this too real quick. So Enid has, if you're familiar with this author at all, she has so many works. I will not be able to touch all of them. Okay, there are so many. So just know that I'm kind of hitting the highlights. I'm hitting the highlights because if I was to go through and talk about every single one of her works that she'd ever done, we would be here all day. So in July of 1923, she also had another book. It was like a collection of poems. It was also published as well. And fun fact about this is one of them was actually featured in Punch magazine, which, if we remember, A.A. Milne, around the same time period, also had his stuff featured in Punch magazine as well. So, and I did do a whole video on A.A. Milne. That is a good one. Definitely go check that one out. So on August 28th of 1924, this is where she marries Major Hugh Alexander Pollock. She did give birth to her two daughters. So her first daughter, Jillian, was born in 1931, and then her youngest daughter, Imogen, was actually born after she had a miscarriage in 1934, and so Imogen was born in 1935. So it was kind of around this time period too, like in the 1930s, because Enid jumped around a lot when it came to kind of what inspired her to make her stories. And so when it kind of comes to her overall kind of portfolio, if you will, she has many different genres and kind of themes throughout her books. And around this time period, she was really interested in like mythology. So in 1939, this is where Enid published her book, The Enchanted Wood. Now, this was the first book out of a whole series that she did, but it was based off of mythology, like a Norsewood mythology that she just was fascinated with as a kid. So it kind of just, it's almost like all of her ideas just kind of kept springboarding off each other. And so this is ultimately where the series came from. And it was actually her daughter, Jillian, who said that it was kind of inspired by the idea of her walking around the woods and finding a tree and climbing up into the tree and then finding kind of all the characters that you kind of find within the book. Now, by the 1940s, her work was very, very popular at this time. She was very, very popular. She had sold tons and tons of books. And so she actually did something that I was really kind of surprised at, and I looked into a little bit more. So she actually decided to use a pseudonym for a few of the books that were published. And the reason she did this was because her books were so popular at the time, her name was kind of marketing her books, as tends to happen. It happens with like actors and singers. When you find someone that you really like, usually if their name is kind of put on it, you think to yourself, oh, this has to be good because so-and-so's in this movie. So-and-so did this album. I love their music. So she wanted to kind of see if her writing would stand on its own and see like, hey, can I just sell books without putting my name on it? Is it my writing or are people just buying it just because my name's on it? And so she actually used the pseudonym Mary Pollock. So it was her middle name and then her married name. And what was kind of funny about this whole instance is so these books were released under this pseudonym. And there were some people, like some really diehard fans of Enid's, that they said, something's not right. Something's not right here. You got to check out this lady Mary. This lady Mary, she's stealing your work. You got to go check this out. And so they like went to bat. They went to bat for Enid because they didn't realize that it was all the same person. So it turned out that her readers were not as easily deceived as she may have thought. And so ultimately, the 6 books that were published under the pseudonym were then eventually republished again under Enid's name because the secret was out. You know what I mean? It was out. Around the 1950s, this is actually where Enid really hit her stride when it came to producing books. She was pumping out like 50 books a year, which I don't know if people like really understand the scope of that. I mean, most authors are pushing out maybe a book, if that, a year, because honestly, like really well thought out books really take time to write, especially if you're doing novels. I mean, that's just insane. That's crazy to me. And so for most of her writing career, she had kind of stuck to like poems and kind of novels for children. That's kind of like where she put most of her energy and her time. But then in the 60s, then she kind of started transitioning to shorter stories for children. So one of her really popular characters, Naughty, she did kind of like a counting book with Naughty and, Tell Time with Naughty. She did those kinds of books towards kind of the end. I think she was just wanting to do more short stories. And it was also due to her just declining health at the time. This is kind of like where her health really started to take a dive. And so a lot of people, because in the 50s, she was really producing so many books, people were really interested to see and to kind of know more about how on earth are you making so many books? This is insane. And so it turns out that her writing style almost didn't really change like a whole bunch. And something that I thought was really fun was that she really kind of just used a whole bunch of different genres within her books. She wasn't afraid to kind of step outside and do something a little bit different or even kind of merge multiple things together. So she would go from like fairy tales to animals to circus themes, detective and mystery. Sometimes she would just kind of blur the lines. I think that makes it really fun, like from like a writer's perspective. And in a letter to a psychologist, Peter McKellar, this is where Enid kind of describes almost like her work process, like her workflow. What am I trying to think of? What's the word? Like her process of creating her books. And she said that she would have her portable typewriter on her lap and she would just close her eyes and she would just kind of clear her mind. She would just clear her mind out. And then in her mind's eye, she would see kind of real children and real characters come to life. And then she would just write. That was kind of like the way it was for her. And so then in another letter to McKellar, she describes how she wrote this book. It was like a 60,000 word book in like 5 days. And she said that she really listens to her undermind, and she separates this from her upper conscious mind. And that book was The River of Adventure, which was the 8th book in her adventure series that she had done. Now, something very interesting about Enid is that she refused to do any research or planning before writing her stories. So, of course, this kind of presents a problem, because when you refuse to write these things out or plan these things out, you kind of inevitably invite the risk of plagiarism, which kind of happened like even with her own works. So, because she did everything just kind of subconsciously, like in her mind. So because she wasn't planning things out or looking into things, she was using everything that she had just kind of stored away in her memory bank. And so this really did create some problems. But she does go on to explain too how her writing from day to day never really changed. She would wake up and she would wear her favorite red Moroccan shawl, which she believed that red was very like mentally stimulating for her. So that's why she wore the red, and she would just start typing away. She would just work and work and work. She would stop for a quick lunch break and then go back to writing again. So most days she was producing between 6,000 to 10,000 words. Victor Watson, who is an assistant director of research at Homerton College, Cambridge, believes that Enid's work was kind of like the encompassing effect of what people kind of expect like an ideal childhood to be. And I think that's why people have kind of really latched onto her books so much and why her books were so successful. He goes on to say that their stories took the readers on a roller coaster like adventure, and the darkness was always vanished, the puzzles were always solved, but ultimately it was just the adventure and just kind of like the ideal childhood like environment that people like were really latched onto these books. Now, some people may be thinking, oh, there's a lot of praise here, so when is the story getting good? Well, trust me, we're getting there. Okay, we're getting there. We have a whole nother thing to unpack. But with a lot of success comes a lot of criticism, and we'll touch on that. Don't you worry. And so kind of jumping back into the 1950s. So mind you, this is like where the height of her production was. She was pumping out so many books a year that rumors started to circulate that she was not writing all of her books. So people had kind of come up with the rumor that she had a ghostwriting team, and this made her mad. This made Enid mad because, one, she worked very, very hard, and this was something she was very, very passionate about. And so this was something she wasn't having it. She actually published an appeal in her own magazine at the time for people to basically come forward with any knowledge on maybe who's saying this stuff, who's coming up with this stuff. Well, a mother wrote in saying that she had actually gone to a meeting where a librarian had said this, had like spoken out about this rumor. She believed this rumor, and she was kind of propelling this rumor around. So Enid found this lady, and it became a whole like legal nightmare. So in 1955, Enid decided to pursue legal proceedings with this librarian because she was saying false things about Enid. And so the librarian was actually forced to make a public apology in court that next year. And so that kind of squashed the rumors on the ghostwriting. So when I was first reading this whole story, I thought to myself, wow, this sounds like great. Sounds like everyone's doing great. Well, this is the part where the wool was pulled off my eyes and I saw everything very clearly for the first time. So as we know, just like with social media today, not everything is as it seems on the surface. On the surface, Enid's family was happy. They would have many sessions with photographers, bringing the daughters out, and they would portray a very happy family life. But unfortunately, family life was not as happy and go lucky as they portrayed it. This started back when Enid was married to her first husband. And so after they had their first daughter, within a few weeks, Enid had hired her first nanny. She wanted all of the work to be put on the nanny. And, there's nothing wrong with using a nanny, especially if you're like a working mom. But a lot of people reported that Enid would only see her daughter for like an hour every day. She just didn't really seem super interested in her daughter or kind of taking on any of like kind of the maternal care for her daughter. And so this nanny, Betty, she was full-time with the family. She was full-time. She even slept there. She slept in the baby's room. But unfortunately, there was an incident where Jillian had actually rolled out of her crib. Enid was the one who she had like no tolerance, which reading this, I mean, I don't know. I think it all depends on maybe like what happened in the circumstance, because in this scenario, I can understand why she would have let Betty go if it was something that Betty had done or if there was severe injury to the child. It just, whatever. I wasn't there. I can't say. But she ended up letting Betty go because of this. So after they had Betty for a while and then she was let go, eventually Dorothy came into the picture. So she was the next nanny that kind of came in, and Enid and Dorothy became very quick friends. They got very, very close. There was a lot of private jokes between them, and they just got along very, very well. And even it was said that Dorothy actually became kind of a proofreader for Enid and would read some of her manuscripts and kind of became almost like her sounding board for her stories. And so also in the 1930s, this is where Enid's husband had actually started becoming an alcoholic, and he just kind of kept withdrawing from public life. And so this was becoming a huge problem. And it is said that this was kind of stemming from potential World War I PTSD. He was meeting with Winston Churchill. So people are kind of thinking, well, maybe this is because he was meeting with Winston Churchill for his job, and it just kind of triggered a bunch of stuff from World War I. And so that just what kind of drove him to alcoholism. And so with the outbreak of World War II, he decided that he wanted to become part of the Home Guard, which for anyone who doesn't know, because I didn't know, I had to look it up, it's almost kind of like the equivalent of the National Guard. So it was around this time of World War II where it was consistently made up of people who really weren't qualified to be in the actual like war unit, like on the front lines. And so it was made up of like veterans or other people who maybe were a little too old or a little too young, but they still wanted to serve their country. So they kind of created kind of like a home base unit, and as a last line of defense, in case the Nazis did start to attack their country, they were the ones there to provide some sort of defense. That was their home guard. So kind of like a National Guard, kind of. And so this is where Hugh, Enid's husband, had actually offered a secretary spot to a lady named Ida Crow. So he had actually met her previously before. She was almost 20 years younger than he was. He offered her a secretary spot to work in this home guard dwelling. I don't even know, because their home base was in this house, like this Gothic style home. And so he offered her the secretary job and she took it. And actually, this is where Hugh and Ida actually started a romantic relationship. So while Hugh was gone, it's said, allegedly, I feel like I have to say all this just because, but allegedly, while Hugh was gone with Ida serving the home guard, Enid was at home entertaining other men in the neighborhood, and was even reported that it was a big thing to play tennis naked. That was like a big thing apparently for her. So that was another thing. So she was just kind of always entertaining men and just kind of doing that kind of stuff. It's also said that she had kind of a series of affairs, including there's one rumored an affair with Dorothy, the nanny Dorothy. So apparently they had an affair together as well, allegedly. So in 1941, this is where Enid met Kenneth playing a round of bridge. So they met each other for the first time. It's reported that it was like love at first sight for both of them. And so they ended up striking up a relationship as well. But the problem was here, not only was Enid married, but also Kenneth was married. There's a story that I found where Enid had purchased a flat for them to kind of rendezvous, if you will. And ultimately they kind of got caught. Eventually they got caught. And Enid reportedly threw Dorothy under the bus, saying it was Dorothy the one having the affair, and her name was on the flat. And basically Enid was saying, like, my hands are clean, I didn't do anything wrong. But when Enid's husband found out, so when Hugh found out, he decided, okay, well, we're going to have a divorce. We're going to get a divorce. And so to Enid, this was going to be a problem, because if he was the one to initiate the divorce, then that was going to make her look really, really bad. And she was pumping out a lot of books at this time. And because now we're kind of closing in on the 1950s time. So she didn't want her image to be marred in any way. So it was ultimately decided that she would be the one to initiate the divorce, citing his affair as the reason for their divorce. And then that way she would almost kind of walk away looking like the good guy, and her reputation would be protected. Part of this deal, part of the way she was kind of able to convince Hugh to let her be the one to initiate the divorce, was she was saying that they would keep kind of split custody on the kids. But once the divorce was finalized, she like completely cut off contact with him. Like she didn't let him see the kids at all. And so she kind of totally backtracked on that whole part of their deal. And it was one of the main reasons why she was the one to initiate the divorce in the first place. And she also made sure that he had the hardest time finding any work in publishing after this whole shebang. And that's kind of what happened, was he had a very hard time finding work. And even after he married Ida, so they ended up getting together and marrying, he kind of fell back into his alcoholism again. And then he ultimately had to file for bankruptcy in the 1950s. So Enid's divorced, and then her second husband, Daryl, so he ended up getting divorced, and then they ended up getting married together after her other divorce was finalized. And so she actually went through and technically changed the surnames of both of her daughters to the new husband's name. And she was very excited to kind of step out into the limelight, embracing her role as just a surgeon's wife, like a happy surgeon's wife. So in the spring of 1945, she actually discovered that she was pregnant. And so at this time, she was like close to 50 years old. I think she was like 48. But they were very excited. The two were very excited. Apparently she was pregnant with a little boy. At the time, they didn't know that, but she did fall from a ladder. And because of the fall, she actually ended up miscarrying the baby at about 5 months. And that's when they found out it was a little boy. And I did read a story somewhere too, where apparently her husband very, very upset at her because he had told her specifically not to climb up on the ladder. And she had done it anyway. She had just, she'd done it anyway. And so apparently he was very upset at her for this. So they were very, very sad about the loss. Because they were both very excited. Around 1957, this is where Enid's health really started to kind of take a decline. And remember, this is kind of also around the time that she started making shorter stories with that really famous character, Naughty. This was kind of around that time where she was like starting to do like shorter books for kids. And she was kind of showing early signs of dementia. She was just like really, really struggling. And people around her even said like, it was really bizarre to see someone who used their brain in the way they did to create their stories kind of getting dementia. And I believe they ultimately kind of decided it was Alzheimer's later down the line. They kind of figured out it was Alzheimer's. So they just kind of said it's kind of crazy that someone who uses their mind in this way would get Alzheimer's at the end. And her husband's health was also declining at this time too. And so that just kind of compounded and made the whole situation worse. He was experiencing severe arthritis, and so he was really, really suffering. So it's said that he was just becoming really increasingly ill-tempered and just erratic towards, like, the closer he got towards his death in September of 1967. So the months after her husband's death, her health just declined even farther. And so she was actually put into an assisted living home, but she was only there for 3 months. And then she passed away. They had a memorial service for Enid, and then her ashes were cremated. And it's actually that crematorium that actually holds her ashes to this day. And now this is the part 2 that I really wanted to include, because she had 2 daughters. And I feel like their experience really matters here. And of course, I'm just the storyteller. So I just kind of wanted to present everything, and then I wanted you guys to let me know kind of what you think down in the comments below. So her daughters apparently had a very different kind of memory on their mom and the experience that they had growing up with her to an extent. So in 1989, this is where Imogen, so Enid's daughter, had actually kind of released her own autobiography, and it's called A Childhood at Green Hedges. And she just does not talk very highly about her mom. She said that her mom was arrogant, insecure, pretentious, and very skilled at putting unpleasant things out of her mind. She also said that there was no trace of maternal instinct in her mom. And as a child, she references that she looked at her mom as a very strict authority figure, but then as she became an adult, she actually pitied her mom. But then Enid's older daughter, Jillian, actually remembers her childhood very differently. She said that she was a fair and loving mother and a fascinating companion. Now, I think this raises some interesting questions because I think there are times where kids in the same household can kind of experience different versions of the same parents to an extent, but I don't know. Because I'm not there to experience that. I wasn't there to experience what they claim to have witnessed or seen. I can't really say. And I also think sometimes, like, as an adult, like, we kind of want to remember things like in a more of a highlight. So, but I'm not calling either daughter a liar because that might be their own reality from the experience that they had as kids. Both might be sharing what is true to them and like what happened to them. Like there's just reports from where they said that like the photographers would come over and they would have these like, sessions where the photographers are taking pictures and they're all happy and, everything looked great. But then behind closed doors, it was just a very different story. It just seemed like their mom just really didn't want anything to do with them. I read some excerpts out of that childhood at Green Hedges. And she talks about how, like, if they were upstairs playing, if they got too loud, like if they were laughing too loud, their mom would come in and just start yelling at them and needing them to be quiet so she could work on her books. And they just said, when cameras basically weren't around, neither was Enid, neither was their mom. Honestly, this story kind of reminds me of Joan Crawford and that whole story to like kind of an extent. Okay, now I'm not saying wire hanger or anything like that, but I'm just saying it just reminds me that you never really know what's really going on. I mean, people can put on such a front and then behind closed doors, it's just a totally different story. So let me know what you think of that below, because I just thought it was interesting that she had two daughters and both were kind of recounting just very, very different situations. And so like I kind of mentioned before, so with all of her success also became a lot of backlash. So while her books were very, very popular, she was not able to escape any criticism. There was actually tons of criticism around her books from different people for different reasons. And some of the main reasons initially were that the books were too simplified. They were, quote, a slow poison and just like mediocre. Like people were just calling her stuff just mediocre. And some of the things that some of these people put out there, I'm like, that is freaking ruthless. That is ruthless. Like I'm all for like healthy criticism, right? I think there's a time and place for healthy criticism. This stuff is just ruthless. Jean Sutcliffe. I hope I don't even know if I'm saying her name right. She was from the BBC's School of Broadcast, but she said this, quote, as mediocre material, she's the one who said mediocre, but then she said, quote, her capacity to do so amounts to genius. Anyone else would have died of boredom long ago. Dang, Jean. Golly day. Now, Enid did have a response for these criticisms because these criticisms were specifically happening around the 1950s. So Enid had her own choice words to say. So Enid's response to these critics was that she had no interest in the opinion of anyone over the age of 12. And now, I kind of wish she would have just kind of stopped there because I feel like I kind of understand what she's saying to an extent. Like her main demographic is the kids. That is where she's like really wanting to put her energy. She's more worried about entertaining the kids. But at the same time, you have to also like appeal to the parents and like to the adults, because they go hand in hand. When you're making something for a child, you have to appease both parties, because then she continues to go on to say this, because I just want to get this right. I'm going to read it. She says that half the attacks on her works were motivated by jealousy, and the rest come from, quote, stupid people who don't know what they're talking about because they've never read any of my books. So I don't think it's fair to like totally discount people's opinions, because they're opinions. Not everyone is going to like your book, and not everybody's going to like your work, and that's totally fine. I know not everybody's going to like my children's book, and that's totally fine. I totally get that. But I would never dream of calling anyone who like disagrees with my stuff stupid. I think that just totally discounts people's own credibility and their own intelligence. And I just don't think that's fair. Fred Inglis also said that her books were technically easy to read, but they were also, quote, emotionally and cognitively easy. Ouch. Then psychologist Michael Woods said that Blyton, so Enid, was, quote, was a child. She thought as a child and wrote as a child. The basic feeling is essentially pre-adolescent. Enid Blyton has no moral dilemmas. Inevitably, Enid Blyton was labeled by rumor a child hater. If true, such a fact should come as no surprise to us, for as a child herself, all other children can be nothing but rivals for her. Yikes. I kind of see both sides of this coin at the same time. Now, I don't believe I have read any of Enid's actual work. I just don't remember my mom reading any of her works to us. And my kids are just not at that age yet where I'm really pulling in a lot of like novels and things. So if you have read her works, I'd be interested to know what you guys think. I mean, do you remember these books? Do you have fond memories of them? Were they really simple and like too simple? I think there's always a healthy balance when it comes to like writing children's material, because you want to be able to kind of stretch the kids, but you don't want to go so far beyond that they can't even comprehend it. So it's always a very fine line. Like it's always a fine balance. So I don't know if this is just, it was adults being just kind of overly critical of children's literature material, or if there really is a basis, or if there's a little bit of both. But the criticism does not end there. So some of her books, especially in the 1960s, so this is like really where her health was declining. Some of her books were kind of going under a massive lens, because one of her books especially, The Little Black Doll, faced huge criticism because people were saying, and like I said, I have not read this book. So if you have read this book, you let me know, because I don't really know the full context around this portion. I know it's easy to kind of cherry pick things out and make it look a certain way. So you let me know. So in this story that was published in 1937, there's this doll who has a black face and is like hated by its owner. So it runs away, but then there's a rain that happens and washes the black off its face, revealing a pink toned face. And then it's welcomed back into the arms of the owner, and kind of everything ends up happening there. Now, like I said, I don't know the full context of that story. If it is kind of the way they say it is, then yeah, I do think there's a problem there. That's just, I don't know about that. I don't know. I don't know. But I think depending on the context of it, there could be other like symbolism there. But like I said, I don't know. So if you've read that book, let me know. But then some of her books were also like thrown with the accusations of being like xenophobic and also sexist. So a lot of her books went under a lot of heat for many different reasons. So that was the story of Enid Blyton. Now, she has sold over 600 million copies of her books, which is absolutely insane. I would hope for that one day for myself. They've been translated into 90 languages. And some of her most famous books were, I wanted to get these all right, Naughty, Famous Five, Secret Seven, Five Find Outers, and Mallory Towers. Those were like her most popular ones. Okay, so what do we think? What are our thoughts here? I think it's very interesting to have someone who creates stories that really kind of shape people's childhood. And I think it's okay to really like those books and enjoy those books, but then at the same time be like, I wasn't super happy about these other things. But I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down below. I'm curious to see, especially people who have read her books. I'm so curious to know your guys' thoughts. So definitely put them down below. If you guys have any recommendations on who you'd like for me to do a deep dive into, just leave them down there. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye. And while she was at Woodbridge Congregational Church, she met, oh my gosh, my freaking brain today. So, and this even started back when Mary was, Mary.